Hi, today I'm going to show you how to checkmate with a single heavy piece. We call a queen or a rook a heavy piece. Let's get started. Okay, so here in this position, the black king is in the center of the board, and you'll notice that when the black king is in the center, it has a lot of squares it can move to. In order to checkmate this king, we have to run it out of squares that it can use. Basically, if it's on the edge of the board, it has less squares it can move to, and in the corner, it has the least number of squares. That's our target, to get it to the edge or even a corner. So how do I get the black king to an edge? Well, basically, if I highlight the squares that I'm attacking, these are the squares that my queen is attacking, we can see that these are all squares, and this is the square that my king is attacking. These are squares that it's illegal for the black king to step on. So if it's black to move, he's forced to move towards an edge or a corner, and this is to my benefit. So let's say the black king takes a step back towards this edge of the board. I'm already very happy, and what I can do is step my king closer. Let's highlight the squares that the queen is attacking. Let's highlight the squares that the king is also attacking, and you can see that we've kind of made a wall, and the wall has shrunk. It's pushed the king a step back. So I'm going to make this a bit trickier by moving the king sideways. The king doesn't want to go to the corner. Let's say the king tries to fight. What I can do here is if I check the king, you'll notice that, for example, even though I've kind of shrunk the box, let's highlight all the squares that I'm attacking. And I'd like for the king to go back. The king doesn't have to go back. He can slip out this way, and then he'd be pretty far from my objective. So I have to be a bit careful when constructing this box. So maybe a more accurate square would be queen d5. If I move from here to here, it watches this hole. It makes a box that looks like this, and it keeps the king tight. So now black has to make a move. Let's say black decides to move here, again, far away from this edge of the board. Another thing you can do is if you have a target of getting the king to one edge and the king is moving to another edge, you can pivot, rotate the board in your mind and say, this is not the target anymore. This edge is not the target. Now this edge is the target, and I'm happy that the black king has moved closer to it. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll put the king in check. Here's the check, and let's highlight the squares that I'm attacking. Here are all the squares that I'm attacking. And the black king can either go here, 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 or here, and regardless of where he goes, it'll be pretty close to this edge. I feel like I'm making progress here. Let's say that the king wants to get away from this corner, the most tenacious way to defend. So if you're very happy with checking the king, and you notice that I just check the king haphazardly over and over again, the king is not going to go to my objective. He's going to go to this square. Let me highlight all the squares that I'm attacking, and you'll just notice that there's a little hole right here. The king will move back towards the center. So I do have to be careful to squeeze the king. So instead, maybe a better move to check the king would be this square on f5, and you'll notice that my king and queen are working together. My queen is delivering the check, my king is defending the queen. If my king weren't here, the black king would be able to take me, but that's not the case. I'm defending my queen. So let's highlight all the squares that I'm attacking, at least the ones that are relevant to this king, right? You'll notice that this king has exactly 2 squares to go to, and both of these are towards the edge of the board. My mission is being accomplished here. Okay, so I'll move the king up here, and now that the king is at the edge of the board, if I move to g4, you'll notice that if I highlight the squares that I'm attacking, I've actually created an L-shaped wall, and this king is trapped up against the edge of the board. There's really not much the king can do. It has to stay in this box, so the king is going to end up moving back and forth, or maybe up here. And then at this stage, you'll see how I deliver the final checkmate. I've done step 1 to corner the king, and now step 2 to deliver the checkmate requires me to bring my king in. So this black king moves up, my king moves closer, the black king moves down, and now that I'm controlling the g6 square, I deliver checkmate with my queen like this. Remember, the goal here is to be flexible. Any edge counts, any corner counts. So what I'd like to do again is just walk you through the method. Let's start checking the king. The king tries to stay in the center of the board. I use my king to defend my queen, and my queen delivers check. Let's highlight the squares that I'm attacking, and you can see that both this move would move towards this edge, and this move would move towards this edge. I'm making progress. So let's say the king steps here. I move my king down. I use my king and queen together to create a nice barricade of squares that I'm attacking, and the king has to further move towards an edge, which I'm pretty happy with. So let's say the king moves down again. I move my king just to match you. Again, I don't even need to check this king. The wall that I'm creating is sufficient. I don't need to attack. You'll notice the moves that I've made haven't checked the king. The king decides to go here. And again, I'll do this without checking the king. I just want to show you that I don't need to attack the king. The king is required to move, and every move that it makes is forcing it closer to the edge of the board. So by the time that the king gets to the edge of the board here, I'm really running it out of squares. And this isn't the optimal way to checkmate the king. I actually am trying to show you an example of a way that you can go wrong. So let's say that it's white to move. I know it's black to move, but let's say that it's white to move, and I decide to bring my king in. I say, okay, the black king's on the edge of the board. I move my white king in. I highlight all the squares that I'm attacking, and you'll notice that the black king has no moves. The black king has no moves. This is a problem. I'm not attacking the king, but it also has no moves. We don't call this checkmate. We call this stalemate. It's a draw. If black has no moves, but is not in check, it's a draw and not a win. So this is the one thing you need to be careful of. Okay, I lied. There's another thing you need to be careful of. Obviously, if I check the king might be able to take my queen. So there's two things to be careful of. One, don't lose your queen, and the other is don't stalemate the king. If you're in a position like this and you're highlighting all the squares that you're attacking, you need to make sure that the black king has a square to move to, or if the black king has no squares to move to, make sure you're attacking the king. It's stalemate if you're not attacking the king. It's checkmate if you are attacking the king. It needs to be check to be checkmate. Okay, so finishing off this game, I might make a move like, let's say this one right here. Highlight all the squares. I make this L-shaped wall at the edge of the board. The black king moves back and forth. And then this is the final stage. I deliver checkmate when my queen is defended by my king. Okay, so I've shown you the method of checkmating with a king and queen, but what about with a king and rook? It turns out that this is actually not so different. If I move my rook up, you'll notice that the rook is attacking a lot of squares, and we highlight all the squares that I'm attacking. It's just like with the queen. I don't need this diagonal in order to create a box and shrink the box. It's just a little bit harder because I'm not attacking a diagonal, but believe it or not, it's also harder to stalemate. It's harder to stalemate, so it's easier to get this without getting a draw. Okay, so let's say the black king moves to d5, trying to stay in the center of the board. It's really trying not to move back. There's a technique here called zugzwang, where you can give your opponent the move when they don't want to move. If your opponent has to move and they don't want to, they're in zugzwang. And if black had to move here, he'd move away from the center. I can use this method of zugzwang by keeping my rook here and passing the move to my opponent by just moving my king. I move my king. Doesn't change anything except for that it's black to move. And when black moves his king, he's got to go away from the center. Let's say the black king goes here, and I shrink the box by 1, again, keeping the rook defended by my king. The box has shrunk by 1. Just to show you guys, this isn't necessarily the fastest way to checkmate, so if you run it through an engine, it might tell you you're making mistakes. But even if it's not the fastest, it's a foolproof way to win. It will always win your games if you use this technique. Black to move, black moves the king here, and I'd like to shrink the box again, but then the black king takes my rook. So it's important that before you move the rook, you first move the king to defend the e4 square where the rook is going to go. The black king moves back, and just like before, I'd like the black king to move, but it's white to move. So I make a move with my king, passing the move to black, and black can no longer stay in the corner of this box. He's got to now move away. Let's say the black king moves away. I shrink the box again. Let's say the black king moves away. Let's draw the box. I would like my rook to be up on the e5 square, but of course that would lose my rook. I need my king to first move up and defend. So I move my king in, and coincidentally, I don't just use the rook to shrink the box. My king is also attacking some squares as well. I shrink the box with my king as well. And you can see this movement with the king is not only bringing the rook up, it's also taking squares away from the black king, pushing it further towards the edge of the board. So the black king maybe moves here. I now shrink the board again with my rook. The black king moves here. The black king is at the edge of the box, the very corner. I'll waste a move with my king. The black king moves back. I shrink again. The black king moves back. I don't dare shrink again because that loses my rook. I first need to bring my king in. The black king moves up now to the corner of this box. And again, I waste a move passing the move to black. Black makes a move. And now finally, we've gotten the same L-shaped checkmate. We're now in the last stage of checkmating the king. So in this last stage of checkmating the king, first I'm going to shrink the king's box down to 2 squares. So let's say the king moves here. He's got a box shrunk down to 2 squares. Let's say the king moves up. I don't dare shrink the box any further because, again, that would be stalemate. What I do is I bring my king really close, just like this, and again, the king has 2 squares to shuffle back and forth to. Whenever the king goes to the corner, my king is removing 3 squares, and this check, my king is removing these 3, right? The rook is removing this one, and it's also check. So the black king has nowhere to go. This would be checkmate. Again, you can do this on any edge of the board. Let me just show you guys again how this might look. This method. I've created the L shape. I've kicked the king to the edge of the board by shrinking this box. The king gets, you know, a little closer to the edge here. There, I've shrunk it down to 2 squares. And now I'm ready to deliver checkmate. One last thing you might need to be aware of is when you check the king, you might notice that the king's able to take your rook. You don't want the king to take your rook. So in this exact position where the king is down to 2 squares and it's white to move, you can always force the king to A1 by wasting a move. So I can just waste a move. I can go here. It doesn't matter. I still got the L-shaped wall because my rook is watching this square. The king steps over, and then I deliver checkmate. Okay, so by now, hopefully you've learned how to checkmate with a heavy piece being a rook or a queen. Just to go over the method really fast, you have a box. You shrink the box until the king has 2 squares left, and then you bring your king in to checkmate it. And then there's 2 things you gotta watch out for. 1, don't lose your piece, and 2, don't get stalemate. So anyways, thanks for watching. Leave some comments to tell me what videos to cover next. Thank you.